So today we're going to talk about automation and self-service, um, and I'm going to have a little bit of fun with it. Whenever Microsoft's not paying me to do something, I think I don't really want to have fun. I have to. Here's my Twitter handles, community site, etc. So love to chat with you online or off after the session. Hope to see some of you guys in Madrid if you're making the trip. So we've got an hour today. Let's just cover off the goals quick. I want to take you through a few key processes around self-service and automation. Just share some key tips and tricks along the way. Help you add some polish to your request offerings. We might hit best practices for runbook automation. I've actually pushed that to the end of the session because I have a lot I want to cover with you, frankly. Um, We'll actually walk through the process of building a self-service offering using, something I've already put together. So I can just point out a few tips and some common areas of confusion. A lot of FAQs that I hear, with customers and users out in the field. I'm going to save 5-ish minutes at the end to answer questions. So if we have any Q&A at the end, I'll stay online a bit after. And then I just want to try to have fun with it. We all work pretty hard putting our private clouds together. So it helps to just unwind a little bit. We've got, like I said, we've got an hour, so there's going to be more demo, a little less PowerPoint than you might see in a normal session, which I know disappoints you, but you'll soldier through it, I'm sure. Our secret ingredient today is CMDB. I want to really talk to you guys about why the CMDB is so important in building that polished self-service solution. And as Chairman Kaga always used to say, a la cuisine, which roughly translated means go cook. If you're not familiar with Iron Chef, I'm kind of an Iron Chef nerd. Kind of a campy Japanese show. Go out and look it up on Wikipedia. It's kind of a neat thing. So our recipe for self-service Iron Chef flavor. Lots of planning. You really need to understand what you're going to build and who you're going to build it for before you start pushing buttons. So we need to understand what it is our stakeholders, our customers, whether those are business units or external customers. If you're a host, it doesn't matter really. We need to understand what it is they're trying to build. What's that process or service look like? What are the service level expectations, etc. System Center 2012 Service Pack 1, as you can well imagine, is a required ingredient. A lot of service manager and orchestrator. If we're going to build a proper self-service experience, I feel sort of unarmed without both of these components, under my control. And really, the entire the System Center as a product has a lot of integrated capability, and if we can just bring all of those together, we have a single license model now with Microsoft. So, Operations Manager, Config Manager, and VMM all bring something to the party when we're building that rich CMDB that's going to allow us to put together a very intuitive self-service offering, an offering that I don't have to take that quasi-technical HR person or finance person and teach them, for 45 minutes how to fill out a self-service form. I can build something, put them in the chair, and in a couple of minutes get them up and running, fulfilling some of their own requests in my production environment. So I should probably back up that statement about the CMDB being so important to self-service. There are actually a lot of reasons for that. I think the most important is it allows us to close the loop from an ITSM, from an ITIL perspective. When I make those service requests, I can collect the user's information. I can validate the details they've provided me. I can make a record of that. In the form of a service request is how we do that with the self-service portal and service manager. I can drive approval workflows at that point. When we think about automation, it's important to remember not everything has to be automated. There's always going to be a place for a smart person with the right training in the chair to, handle a few key decision points like approval here and there. So you automate, some of that heavy lifting that makes sense, and we have those manual junctions where it suits our process. This is going to be a rich repository of data for populating menus in the self-service portal. So if I want to present Active Directory groups or service templates or virtual machines or insert list of objects here, I can give my user a list of boxes they can check. Everybody can check a box, and it avoids typos, and it avoids confusion, and it avoids forcing a user to with a lot of answers. I can provide them with let's call it a reasonable number of choices. There's a such thing in this world as too much choice, and we don't want to take ourselves down into that dark place where we have so many choices that we don't know what it is we need to do. This is going to automate tracking of updates to our configuration items. So as we make those service requests, we can make associations between the configuration items, the computers, the users, the applications, the services, etc. We can associate those to the work items, to the service requests, in this case. And the CMDB, also a great place for we can easily create custom classes for tracking external activities, like deployment into public cloud. If I'm pushing virtual machines with System Center 2012 SP1 up to Azure, that is a great way. This is a great way to track those assets as well and try to bring everything into a single pane. Now, Service Manager makes populating our CMDB very easy by and large, and I suspect most of you are familiar with the connector framework. If you're not, here's about 60 seconds of what that looks like. So each of your System Center components, VMM, Ops Manager, Config Manager, have a connector that will allow us to populate the CMDB with configuration items. So with VMM, you can imagine that's virtualization related. Operations Manager has a rich array of classes from the management packs that we install there. Some of the basics, the bare necessities from Operations Manager, computers and properties and network devices, and so some of that comes over by default. And then there's this sort of undiscovered country there with a lot of additional rich class data in Ops Manager that we're not even using out of the box, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And then Config Manager, and Active Directories, computers, users, software, updates, relationship between users and their computers. So we get a lot of the heavy lifting of populating a CMDB with meaningful data and the lifecycle management for free with Service Manager. If you can run a connector in the UI and set it up, which we all can, we're 90+% of the way home on building our ideal CMDB. But let's talk about importing information from external sources. So Enterprise has something they would like to get in their CMDB, and it doesn't fit in that neat little box of the System Center and Active Directory connectors, right? We might want to bring in network devices or mobile data or computers that live out in a work group, outside of our management domain. But we need to track them, and we'd like to work with them from a self-service or an asset management perspective, perhaps. I'm just going to flip over to my my screen here, my demo system, and we'll have a look at a little bit of the Service Manager to import external data. So if we have data that doesn't show via those connectors, Service Manager has what we call the Import CSV connector, and I'll show you where you find that real quick. This Import CSV wizard comes up right below our connector menu, and it allows us to bring configuration items into our CMDB automatically. You just have to know how to put your CIs into comma separated value format. Again, pretty low-hanging fruit, right? We can throw that into a format like this. So what I have here is just a list of workgroup computers outside my domain. I have computer name, IP address, and then their DNS domain. So their directory domain or whatever I want to call that identifier. And then here I have what we call our XML format file. So this file actually tells Service Manager, tells this wizard basically what the columns in that CSV file mean. So I'm importing, in this case, objects of the type Windows Computer. So if you look there, you'll see my class type is Microsoft Windows Computer. So that's one of the foundational classes in Service Manager. It's there by default. And I've put the properties there that are in my spreadsheet. Now, of course, the computer class has many more properties than that, but I don't have to deal with all of them. I'm just going to deal with those that actually are meaningful to me in this particular situation. What's great about Service Manager and its management of the life cycle of my assets, if I update this spreadsheet and import it again, Service Manager knows not to create duplicates of all those objects. It's going to be smart about that, and it's going to update my CI instances rather than creating new configuration items every time I run a spreadsheet. That would be very prone to human error and mostly just really, really aggravating. So I'm going to hit the Import CSV wizard here, which is in the administration workspace, and you notice here it's going to give me 2 boxes to fill: that XML format file and that CSV file. Those are both really easy to put together. Lots of examples on the internet. I know Travis has blogged 2 or 3 good ones, himself. I hit the go button. This is going to run through the process, tell me what's going to be committed to my database. If I have any errors, it's going to show that to me as well. Incidentally, you can take this process and you can put that into a runbook in Service Manager. A runbook in Orchestrator, and we automate this process using Orchestrator and a few native activities along with a little bit of PowerShell. Service Manager actually has a PowerShell commandlet within its command shell that will allow us to handle this process from the command line in PowerShell rather than the UI. Super easy to take that and automate it in a runbook. I think I've got something out on the blog about that one. As well, and then we can kind of take that external population of our CMDB and put that on autopilot, so quick and easy. And everything I get into the CMDB, remember, everything I get into my CMDB is something I can use to populate a menu in Service Manager. So I want to fill this CMDB with interesting data. So I'm just going to flip over to my configuration items here, and what you'll see is I have some custom folders I've created in my configuration items. Nothing fancy here. I've just added a lot of custom data to my CMDB, and much of that using the CSV import process, either in the UI or from PowerShell, or putting that on autopilot with Orchestrator. And everything I get here, I can put into some form of self-service drop-down menu in Service Manager in my self-service portal, and make this process for my users really, really intuitive. For example, the runbook we're actually going to be looking at is, or the self-service offering we're going to be looking at is a self-service security group request. So users can ask for membership in a particular security group, and that's all easily delivered in drop-down menus because I've populated my CMDB with the data, so they don't have to remember the name of the group. They don't even have to tell me who they are, frankly, with the portal. That's one thing you're going to notice about this request offering, is I don't ask who they are because they've authenticated to the SharePoint portal, and that user token is captured by Service Manager automatically. So that information is going to be available to me from the service request that's going to be generated from this process. So I'm not going to worry about asking the user who they are, or asking them to prove their identity in this case, because frankly I already know. They don't really have to tell me anything. And I'll just drop down in here quickly and we'll have a look at what I'm talking about. And what makes this interface, Service Manager, really the place to drive our polished, enterprise-grade self-service from, is the fact that we can handle some of those preliminary elements, like validating our data. So if I need to capture a numeric cost center, I can tell the user what the valid values are. I can catch them, as you can see here, when they put in an inappropriate value. I can provide drop down. So here's my self-service security groups, and they can pick these groups. I can even configure Service Manager to let those pop up and show them a little more detail about the objects they're working with little hyperlinks to the activity. So we'll get back to that in just a moment. I want to get back to this topic of operations manager and all of that rich data I alluded to over there. So, what is operations manager add to the dish here? At the end of the day, by default, it's giving us information about frequent or common classes, computers, network devices, etc. It also has this, what to many of my customers, my colleagues in the community is a secret ingredient. We have a massive amount of application data. If you're monitoring SQL, SharePoint, Exchange, Link, insert your application here, I don't care what it's called. Our management packs in Operations Manager define classes and discovery logic and the monitoring workflows. And it's really those classes we care about. There's just a huge amount of application data there that if I can get it into the CMDB, I can use it to populate menus and make really polished, professional-looking service offerings. And a lot of this information is not synchronized by default. That's the real key point to take away here is it's not synchronized by default, but it's easy for us to change that. Operations Manager and Service Manager share some of the same genes, and by that I mean their platform is very similar. Service Manager was in some respects based on some of the schema, the Ops Manager platforms. You see a lot of similarities between the two. Most importantly, Service Manager and Ops Manager both understand management packs. And Service Manager understands Ops Manager's management pack schema. So I can whitelist classes, and what I mean by that is I can tell Service Manager to allow additional classes to be populated in the CMDB across that Operations Manager configuration item connector. So I first need to identify the class name and the source in my management pack, which means I need to open a SCOM command shell, define the class, and I need to find the management pack in which that class was defined. Because I'm then going to import that management pack into Service Manager. And the great part about that is, import that management pack, Service Manager has the class definition, just as though I had opened the Service Manager authoring console and built it from scratch, except I didn't. I just imported a management pack. This manager only cares about the classes there. It doesn't care about the discovery workflows and the monitoring workflows, so it safely ignores those. We're not causing any problems there. I have to update the Ops Manager CI connector, so I need to go do a refresh in my connector configuration, which is going to populate those additional management packs into the list of management packs that I am synchronizing across that connector. I need to update the instructions for the connector as well by whitelisting this particular class. And what I mean is I need to tell Service Manager the additional class or classes that are authorized to be synchronized across that connector. We do that with a commandlet that allows us to add a class to the whitelist, so to speak. And then I'm going to initiate a synchronization by Ops Manager CI connector just to speed this process along, so I can bring that data into my CMDB rather than waiting for the one-day synchronization cycle that we have by default. So let's just pop over and go through that process together briefly and get a feel for how that comes together for us. So I will start with my Operations Manager command shell. Now on the Ops Manager side of the house, we have a commandlet called get sc class. That'll pull back all of the classes that are present in our Ops Manager management group. Now, if you are looking for a class that you know exists in this world, but it's not in your management group, great sign that you haven't imported that management pack in Operations Manager yet, and you should do that. So in my case, I wanted to pull up a list of SQL-related classes. Let's say I wanted to put SQL databases in my CMDB, and it could just as easily be, SharePoint, Exchange, whatever else you want to open service. You may want service offerings to allow users to request backup and restore of mailboxes and SharePoint artifacts, etc. on demand, and you might use the instances of the classes discovered by SCOM as query-based lists in your self-service portal, so the users can just pick from a list that you give them, rather than being forced to supply you with names and technical details that perhaps they don't fully appreciate the value of. So what I'm doing here is just getting the name of the class that I care about. So maybe what I care about is the Microsoft the SQL 2008 database engine. I can do one class. I can do multiple classes. Anecdotally, if we need to do multiple classes, we need to take these names and whitelist all of the classes that you care about. So I'm going to grab just, for example, SQL 2008 database, and you'll notice that I just pulled back a list of the classes and the names here because I wanted to get the name rather than the display name, because that's the easy one to use with the whitelisting commandlet. And I also need the name of the management pack that I need to import into Service Manager. So now at this point I'm going to go over to my Service Manager system and I'm going to import that management pack. And you do that in the admin workspace management packs node. You just do a quick import. So quick and easy and done. Now I did a little bit of this work ahead of time so we could squeeze all into the hour here. So you'll notice that I've imported the SQL Server 2008 discovery pack. I've got the pack in here that contains the definition, the class definition for the class that I would like to whitelist across that connector. With the management pack in there, then I need to go update my Ops Manager CI connector. And when you go into your CI connector, you'll have a list of management packs. You have to hit a refresh button. You pick up the updated list of management packs and check the box by those that you added. And at that point we're configured. So now this connector, next time it runs, is going to know what additional classes I've added. You notice here it's set to sync at 2 a.m., which is much longer than I'm willing to wait. So I'm just going to come over and hit synchronize now. It's going to kick that sync process off, and in just a few minutes we'll actually have that additional data flowing if we've properly whitelisted. Now this is the key piece right here. In order to add a class to the whitelist, I need to use the add-scsm allow list class commandlet. This is the last thing I'm going to do before I actually kick off that sync option. So you put this class in here, and if it's already in here, it's going to error out. And you'll see here it actually tells me this is already in the allow list. You can pull back your allow list by using the get verb instead of the add. This will pull it back, and you'll notice in my what you'll see is in my dev environment I have a very large tab keys stuck there. What I have is a very large list of whitelisted classes. It's common that you will have a smaller list. There's my actual SQL related list. So you can see I've got a few there. Mine's big enough to scroll off the screen, so I'm saving you some detail there. So we get that whitelisting done. At that point it's time to hit synchronize now. This is going to kick this process off, and I've given I've given Service Manager the information about that additional SQL class. With the whitelist command, I've given it permission to populate that class in my CMDB. And you might, ask yourself, well, why don't we just populate everything from Ops Manager by default? Well, that's not a great idea, because then we are littering our CMDB with potentially, thousands or tens of thousands of configuration items, and that leads to bloat. We just want to pull over what we need. So we really want to kind of focus on efficiency in that process, so we're not pulling across a lot of what amounts to litter, because it's not, really, something we want to manage as an asset, and maybe not something we're going to leverage in the context of or self-service. So you'll notice here I have a lot of databases you recognize. I have database engines, aka the SQL instance, and that's really just an example. I've got things over here from that are cloud related, that are just all manner of common scenarios. There's really no one or list of right activity or write classes to synchronize into your CMDB, because everybody has their own use case that's important to them. So bottom line, you want to tap that information, because that'll allow us to do things like populate a menu with drop downs with multi-select type information, rather than asking a user to give us a lot of free text information. I've actually seen some really significant and persistent and terribly frustrating production problems in organizations that in their service delivery, in their service request, in their incident collection, their problem reporting, were allowing the users to make to put too much manual information in there. Those drop downs really drive consistency in our requests. I'm a big fan of anything that avoids unnecessary free text data input. So let's shift gears for a moment and just talk about how we bring that service catalog together. So Service Manager has role-based access control that ties into Active Directory just like every other System Center component. So we can leverage our identity platform that we've all been using for the better part of a decade and a half at this point. Users are going to see offerings based on their role, number one. So that's not the whole story, but users are going to see offerings based on their role. Service Manager is going to allow, out of the box, basically anybody that is authenticated in our domain, any authenticated user, to open incidents through the portal. You don't have to do a heck of a lot to sort of turn on that, basic functionality. However, as we build our request offerings for our self-service portal, we surface those in our service catalog. Users don't have visibility into those by default. That's actually a reasonably common question in the real world. Folks will build your service and request offerings and then say, hey, my self-service portal is empty. I would say about half the time it winds up being based on permissions. So we map these user groups within Active Directory to roles in Service Manager. We're going to provide access at the service offering level and or at the individual request offering level. We're going to do that with catalog groups. But I want to go back to this third bullet right here, okay? We're going to provide access at the service offering and or the request offering level. So I just want to touch on the difference between service offering and request offering in the UI in just a moment, because this is a really common area where I see folks get confused. Once we get over the reasonably simple concept of this is what a catalog group is and this is what it does, the question comes, well, why do I need to do it at the request offering level and the service offering level? Well, it's because we can control the visibility at a very granular level. This is just opening up our options. So we'll look at that in just a moment here. So I'm going to flip over. We're going to have a look at that process of just building our request offering from the ground up, and just point out a couple of tips here and there that will make this hopefully an easier, more consistent, more standardized process for you and give you a more polished result. So when I'm talking about those service and request offerings, when I come back to the home page of my portal, okay, I have the big blue menus, which are my categories. Incidentally, I can control these categories in the UI. These are an important navigational aid, so to speak, in that they can allow me to create a solution that makes it very easy for my user to navigate to the request offering they want. Because we have a catalog that may have a lot of request offerings in it, we want to make sure that a user can sit in their chair and they can get there without us having to give them a 45-minute training class on how to fill out a web-based form. So if I want to change those categories around, if I want to just begin to customize, there's a service offering category menu, and I can add menu items here. I can change existing menu items. I actually see some organizations that really simplify this to match their user audience, and instead of having and I'm just changing one there so you'll actually see it update within the next couple of minutes here in my my self-service portal. But we'll see customers, maybe simplify this language even more, and these big blue categories will say something like, I need access to a resource. I need to deploy a new virtual machine. I need to I need to do X. Whatever, so the good part is, you have full, control over the verbiage here, so you can, configure your portal in a language that your audience understands. And that's really seems to be a trivial point, but it's very important in the success of your offering. And then down here we have the request offering. So right below the categories we have the service offering, which is a collection of one or more related request offerings. So we're grouping things logically into service offerings like access services, and then beneath we have our request offerings, and I can control visibility at both levels. So I'm only going to present to a particular group the service request in the service catalog, the service offerings and the request offerings that are relevant to their job role. Now I'm going to be looking at that request access to Active Directory group runbook and request offering with you here right now. So we have to build a runbook in Orchestrator. And I have some nested runbooks here that use small, modular, function-specific runbooks, which is exactly where you want to be. You want to build your runbooks that you can use over and over again. So building new automation in the future just becomes a faster process because you've created little reusable bits that you can use over and over. So you see, for example, I have a runbook that's dedicated to just getting the affected user's name. I have another that just parses out the input. All the user's input in that form is actually specified in a user input XML file. You can go retrieve that and parse it. Orchestrator makes that very easy for you to do with an activity called Query XML. And you might say, I'm not an XML expert. What that Query XML file does, or activity does, is allows you to create XPath queries to parse the XML document that you retrieve, that user input. So Query XML uses XPath queries, which are reasonably easy to learn. So if you're not an XPath query expert, as I was not, and still am not, frankly, but there's a website, w3schools.com, that has a great XPath query tutorial. It takes about 15 minutes, and you walk away from that with all of the information you need to parse a simple XML document. Now, the other area I want to focus on with you quickly is what does a runbook designed for use with Service Manager look like versus other runbooks. And so here are the important elements of that that configuration right here. So it's these first three activities you see in my Add User to Group offering. You see an initialize data activity, a get relationship activity, and this one here is a get object activity that you notice I've renamed to get SR, which means get service request. My best practice in Orchestrator is I'm always going to rename those little activities so they tell the story of what I'm doing in this runbook. So initialize data. You're going to notice here we're only asking Service Manager. We're only accepting one piece of input from Service Manager, runbook activity ID. And I'm going to use that runbook activity ID to go look up the relationship between the runbook automation activity and the service request in which that activity is contained. So I'll look up that relationship, the related class being the service request, and then from here, using my published data, I can use what we call related object GUID. So in that last activity, we looked up the relationship between the runbook activity, runbook automation activity, and the service request. Well, one of those pieces of published data is the GUID of the related class, the service request. So now I have that service request. I can go find the affected user, the user input, etc. All very easy for me to do. You'll notice here that I'm parsing user input. That's actually a published property when we go get the SR. So now I have in my hands what the user told me they wanted. I'm home free. You may ask yourself, or you may want to ask me, why are you only asking for the runbook activity ID? Because we could put all of the parameters in here, and we could pass them all in here, and then I wouldn't have to go parse that XML. Yes, you're right, and here's why. Over time, I may want to change this around a bit. Experience is going to tell me things in the future that I don't know today, that maybe this request offering needs to be modified. I need to add some new fields. Maybe on the runbook end of things, I need to add some new logic or branches of activity into this runbook to make it more reliable. If I add or remove parameters, input parameters from this initialized data activity, I'm going to break the link between this runbook and the request offering on the other end, basically. So by never changing this, by asking for just this one piece of activity, I know that I can be very flexible in making changes on the service manager side and the orchestrator side because I haven't touched the core link right there in the middle between the two. So I'm gonna frankly just sleep easier at night knowing that I'm not breaking anything as I evolve my self-service processes in a very natural way to build something that is more intuitive, more reliable, and just all around better for my organization. And that's going to really open the door for me to do that in a very easy way that minimizes any duplication of effort, rework, so to speak, in fixed integration between all of these components. So let's just go through the process of that service request and talk about what it is we need to do in terms of steps to get this done. So the first step is in the administration workspace on that connectors node, you need to configure the orchestrator connector. This is going to allow us to synchronize our runbooks. Environment, I have hundreds of runbooks. Now, have I synchronized all of those over to Service Manager? Absolutely not. I only want to synchronize the runbooks that are of interest to me from a self-service perspective. I don't want to synchronize 5, 6, 7, 800 runbooks just because. I want to synchronize the 15, 20, 50, that are going to be really important to me from a self-service perspective. So I'm going to be very selective about what I do there. So you'll notice here that this connector leverages the orchestrator web service, that RESTful data web service, to bring that information over. And it asks me to pick a sync folder. Now I use very highly standardized naming conventions and folder organization in my orchestrator environment. How you do that is not as important as actually doing that, making sure that you have a system for naming and organizing and securing your runbook that works for your organization. Particularly if you have a growing library of runbooks, you have multiple people building them. It's going to be very important that we're all on the same page for how we're going to name, organize, promote from development through production. So again, we have to talk to our colleagues, right? So a little bit of an ounce of planning, saves a lot of grief down the road, frankly. So once we have those runbooks in here, I'm going to go to my library. So the library is where I find reading material, frankly. It's where I find my templates, my lists, all of those elements that I can use in the background to configure this self-service experience. I'm going to go to the templates node, remembering that Service Manager is highly template based. The first type of template I'm going to create, I'll just hit create template and show you, and then we're going to flip over to the finished product. It's going to be an activity that allows us to get the runbook in there. And I'm going to flip this to all basic classes because frankly I'm not quite sure what the frequent basic classes are, but you'll notice here there is a runbook automation activity. I'm going to create a runbook automation activity template. So I'm going to find the one I've already created for this particular offering. You notice it's free text search, so if I forget the name of what I've done, I can basically type it a couple of times. Here's my add user to Active Directory group runbook activity, runbook automation activity template. So I'm going to open this up and just show you what we're doing here from a sort of linkage perspective. So I give it a friendly name, give it a name and give it a title You notice that I put RBA template in the name. I do that because it allows me to easily filter out my runbook automation activity templates from the other types of templates in my library, like my incident, change, problem management, service request, etc. So come up with, I would just suggest coming up with a naming convention that allows you to easily search and pull up only the templates that are important for your particular search. Now, remember, runbook automation. The runbook activity ID is all I care about, right? So I'm gonna basically map this runbook to the ID of that runbook automation activity. This is all that orchestrator runbook wants. This is my link. Okay, that's step one. And I've made this kind of a bulletproof process by boiling it down to just that one input that's never going to change. So no matter how much changing I do to the request offering itself or to the runbook itself, as long as I leave these this point of connection together, I'm absolutely safe. Now I'm going to go into now the service request template, and we're going to look at the activities in this service request template. Now I'm going to flip from the diagram view to over what we call the list view, and I do that so we can actually see the detailed text information. So you notice here I have two activities. I have what we call a review activity for approving the request, and then I have the runbook automation activity here, denoted by that RB prefix, which initiates that runbook over in Orchestrator. So Service Manager is going to trigger that runbook. It's going to pass over the runbook activity ID and kick that process into motion after the approval is done. Now I want to just cover off this whole idea of approval. Well, I don't need approval because these are going to be automatically approved, whatever. I am a big fan of putting that review activity in even for automatically approved self-service requests. That review activity has an approval condition called automatic, which means that as soon as this fires, the approval is complete. We don't have to worry about it. It's just marked as complete and it moves on. That does two things. That means we've had a conversation with the folks in our support organization responsible for ITSM, for ITIL, for our ITIL implementation, for our service management and delivery strategy, and we've agreed this is going to be automatically approved today. The other thing it does is makes it very easy for us in the future as we evolve to come back and potentially add to this something other than automatic approval mechanism. So I can come in and add unanimous percentage, put groups of people in there, folks that must vote, people with veto, etc. And then on this side of things, I just have that. I've just basically added that runbook automation activity template. So I didn't really create anything new. I just selected that template we created in the last step. So super easy to put together. So let's switch gears now and take the next step, and we'll go look at the area where we configure our service catalog, where we bring all of this together. So I'm going to go down here to Service Catalog, also in the library. And remember our hierarchy, we have those categories at the top level, right? Then we have service offerings, and then we have request offerings. So in my service offerings, I'm going to go to the publish service offerings because we can mark request and service offerings as draft or published, which means they're not going to appear unless we publish them. So Access Services was the name of my service offering, to which I can add one or more request offerings, which I add right down here. And you'll notice that request access to Active Directory groups is right there. So before you can add the request offering to the service offering, you have to create the request offering, right? So I'll go over here and we will look at the request offerings that are published our environment. So as we double click into this one, we're going to get the usual prompt to check the box and open, and here I'll find my user prompt. So when I create a request offering, I opened an existing. You'll notice that you can basically launch the Create Request Offering wizard right here. So we're going to step through a completed one, so I can just point out the configuration bits here and show you a couple of tips and point out a common stumbling block or two that I see folks struggling with often. You'll notice that these prompts here are just free text. So I'm literally just typing in what I want the user to see, which means I can put parentheses here and put example. I can put little for examples here to show them an example of valid input. However I want to handle it, frankly. And I can set the data type. So you see there we've got an integer data type in this one. I have a text data type, which is just please enter your justification there, which is just tell me why you want this. Now the one that's interesting here is I set the please select list of 80 groups for which you are requesting access to query result. I'm going to go to the next tab where I configure the prompts, and I'm going to show you what we do to configure these prompts. So if I look at an integer-based data type, I'm going to have basically a control here that will allow me to automate validation of the input. So at some level. So at this point, you see I've got a range that I've set for valid data types. For string input, I get another set of validation capabilities to check for phone numbers and email addresses and international phone numbers and URLs. And if all else fails, a .NET regular expression. So I can use regex to check for just about anything that I'm capable of writing an expression or, finding on the internet through a search. And you see I can set some limits around my. We get to this one in the middle here. This configuration is a little different. So I'm going to browse out to a class in this. Active Directory security. The next tab, I'm going to tell Service Manager which Active Directory security groups to bring in. You will notice here that the OU these particular groups sit in is called security groups, which means I can create a variety of self-service scenarios based on Active Directory groups simply by filtering down to a specific set of groups. For to grant access to using Active Directory groups, I could have Active Directory security groups that have SQL in the name. I could filter down to security groups with the name SQL. I could call the service offering, request access to a SQL server, and this runbook, this request offering, which is effectively the same as what you're looking at right here, would take on a very different context, right? Simply by making minor changes. More good news, you can actually make a copy of a request offering and go make those minor changes. And so I build a second request offering for a completely different purpose, to make it intuitive to my end user, maybe using Active Directory groups for access to a variety of resources, but I'm building this out in a way that's very easy for my user to go find, the difference between, the different resource access requests that they want to work with. It just doesn't take me, it's not a linear process for me. I don't have to go through the same amount of work every time. You do have to map prompts for your text and numeric data to bring it into the form. You can map the prompts. Something you want to get done. We're not mapping a prompt, however, for that query-based list. Those are objects. Those are CIs in our database, so an object doesn't fit into a text field in a form. However, as we run through this process out here on the, there's a final tab where we can effectively tell Service Manager to attach that stray fat finger here. You can tell Service Manager to attach that as a related item to this request. So we want to make sure that we tell Service Manager what to do with each of the pieces of information that we are collecting in this process. You get all of your configuration done when all lifting is finished. Now let me just go back in here. Make sure you see this. That option I'm talking about. So we configured the filtering down to the groups we cared about. I tell Service Manager which columns I want to display, which properties. Here's the key piece I wanted you to see, and that's this right here. if we don't check this box to add the user to the selected template as an affected configuration item, you're going to get an error when you try to save this request. So if you have a query-based list where you're populating those CIs, make sure you do that. We save that off. We're going to now add this request offering to the service offering where we want it to appear. So we basically, in that access services category, go to the request offerings node and we add it very quickly, and that's just basically hitting the add button and picking from the list of request offerings. So now it's in there. The last step is we need to give our users access. We do this through a two-step process. We're going to create catalog groups that will contain this information. Now for access services, you're going to notice that I have two catalog groups. One is for the request offering, the other for the service offering. I'm going to add these request offerings dynamically or statically to this. Now you'll notice I'm basically adding anything that has a service offering category of access and security to this catalog group automatically, which is typically the way we do that. It puts it on autopilot. All I have to do when I create the service offering is pick that category, and it's automatically going to appear in the right catalog group. I need to go add the request offerings. You're going to notice that I'm doing some dynamic work as well on the request offering. Let me get the right catalog group open. So as I get all of my offerings in here, I now need to take the last step, which is granting the user access, the self-service user role that I've created. So I've got a user role I created for my data center self-service consumers. I'll go out here and I'll look at my catalog item groups, and this is where I grant them permission to only the selected groups that I want them to see, which means I'm going to add and remove information from their self-service portal based on the boxes I check here. And you'll notice that I have the data center and cloud service and request offerings out here. I have my access services and requests that I can grant the access to, and at that point, there I have it. I now have a self-service experience set up for this user from end to end. I get this service catalog that gives me the nicely organized request offerings, gives me the nicely organized service categories and service offerings, so somebody can basically, if they can read the form, they can drill down to what they need to with a moderate to very small amount of training, which is really what we want. We want an experience that's easy, but we don't have to take a master class to get to that point. So I'm just about out of time there. I did want to mention that if you don't have Service Manager, you can still use an existing platform with Orchestrator to drive those external runbook initiations. So I don't really have time to demo this for you with the Q&A, but what I'm going to do at the end of the session is I'll point you to a blog post where I lay this out step by step, how you get your inputs and you trigger a runbook from PowerShell. It's really quite easy to do, frankly, if you have PowerShell, Orchestrator, and Excel with Power Pivot. I can go get all of those nasty GUIDs that I need to make a PowerShell script that's very easy for me to use to trigger runbooks from anywhere, frankly. So this brings me to a point. I've got about 3 minutes here. I can hang around after the session if you all have questions. If you don't have questions, I'll just jump in and show you the how-to for that external initiation of request offerings. I'm just going to pull up and see if we've got any questions. If any, okay, so Jacob's got one here. If you have any of your activities in your runbooks fail, the runbook will end as warning or failed. Blah, 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 blah. Okay, looks like you're just answering a question. I usually throw a new error from PowerShell as the last activity to make sure it has failed, but how do you avoid this? So typically, I will do something very similar, just end with that sort of information. I also tend to drive some result back to the service request to mark it with some bit of information. So if it's failed, I'm going to do more than a pass or fail. I'm going to go right back to the service request, potentially why it failed. And to do that, I'm just using a little utility runbook where I'm passing in some information about the failure, typically an error title and description, and then the requesting runbook, so I can write back to the service request where it likely failed. But yeah, so that's a little bit challenging in some respects to deal with in a tidy way, isn't it? I'm looking to see if we have any other questions. Who all is left? So I have a few people left. You know what? I'm going to wait for you guys to ask questions, but at the same time, what I'm going to do is pop over into my environment, and I want to show you how easily trigger runbooks from outside Orchestrator. So if you do a Bing search, you will find that on MDN there's an article that explains how to initiate runbooks from PowerShell. It's really quite simple. I'm just going to grab it right quick here. And I think it's start runbook from PowerShell, MSDN. Let's go Microsoft.com, and what this article gives you is a sample PowerShell script. Now, there's two things about this script that are very important and can be a little bit confusing. I've had this question 3 times now, and so I wrote an article about it. I figured it was a trend. Down here in the PowerShell part, what you're going to see is that there are 3 areas that you need to update in this this PowerShell script. So the first thing you need to do is to provide the GUID of your runbook. It's the RBID line. And then you'll notice beneath that you have to add the GUID and the value you would like to pass in for every parameter. So the GUID and then the text or numeric or whatever value you'd like to add. You can pass multiple parameters by concatenating them with, separating them with semicolons, as you see here. And then the third line you need to change is down there you'll see the little red URL that is your Orchestrator web service. So what's challenging about this? The URL shows you how to put these parameters in a URL. And sometimes that works for me, and sometimes, Internet Explorer, sets out to aggravate me, and it doesn't work out. So what is really easy for me to do, if I know Excel, I can use Excel and PowerPivot along with that Orchestrator web service to go pull that information out of my Orchestrator environment and get those parameters very, very easily. So I'm just going to really quickly show you how we do that. So PowerPivot is something that is included with Office with Excel 2013. By default, it's simply not enabled. You actually enable it in COM add-ins down in the options menu. And then I can launch this Manage menu in PowerPivot. I'm going to pick from other sources, and then I'm going to scroll down to the other data, the other feeds options, and I'll hit next. I'm going to supply here the URL of my Orchestrator web service, which is right here. So pretty well known in the world, you'll be able to find that very easily in your Orchestrator environment. I'm going to paste that in here. I'm going to hit next because this should connect just fine. There's 2 tables I'm going to pull back here. I need to get the ID of the runbook. I also need to get the GUIDs of the runbook parameters. So I'm going to be using a very simple runbook that was designed for this example called Call from Web Service. This actually does one very simple thing. It accepts a message as input, and then it logs that message to the event log. So the message is my parameter, but that PowerShell script wants the GUID, right? So I'm going to, through PowerPivot here, I'll get runbook parameters and runbooks, those 2 tables. I'll hit finish. These are going to populate. And what I'm going to do is first use the runbooks worksheet to get the GUID of my runbook. Then I'm going to flip over to the runbook parameters worksheet, and I'm going to get the GUID of the parameters. But all I have to know to make all of this happen is the name of my runbook. So I'll start on the Runbooks tab here. Let me unlock my taskbar so you can see a little more. So what I have here is the name of my Runbooks, and I have the ID of the book. So that's the GUID. This first, the value I'm looking for. So what I'm going to do is just sort my Runbooks by name alphabetically, and I'll scroll to the C's and find that call from web server GUID. So what you may or may not have noticed in the PowerShell script is we have to remove the curly brackets from around the GUIDs. It doesn't want the curly brackets, and if you try to pass in there, it's going to error. It's going to give you, I forget, it's like 400 or 500 error. I want this GUID right here for my call from web service runbook. This is the runbook ID. Now I'm going to go over to the runbook parameters table. Very important field here is the runbook ID field. This is how I'm going to filter down to just the parameters that belong to my runbook, because you'll notice there are loads of parameters here, hundreds of them in my list. So on that runbook ID that I just found over on the Runbooks tab, I'm just going to select runbook ID equals. I'm going to paste this in, and if I was able to cut and paste right, there is the ID of my parameter. So now I'm to a point that I can cut and paste these into my PowerShell script. Now I want to point out one very important point. You may have noticed that the GUIDs are entirely in uppercase. The letters are in uppercase as we get them out of the spreadsheet there. And you'll notice everything I have here, the letters are in lowercase. That's because the web service is going to just puke up on you if you try to pass it capital letters. So what you can do is use that runbook ID. You'll notice I've removed the curly brackets there. I can use I believe it's the to lower method. So I can use a PowerShell method to try to turn that into lowercase. And oops, sorry. Let me type what I think that method was. The other way you can do this is there's a lower function in Excel. So if I'm going to just dumb this down for myself because my memory fails me there, what I can do is paste my value in field A, and then I can actually just put a formula in here to say lower A1. So I grab that lowercase version, and I'm in a good place. So basically what this lower function does is takes the upper, turns it to lower. So you paste your GUID into field A, do the lower, and now I've got a PowerShell and Orchestrator web service friendly GUID. I've removed the curly brackets, I've lowercased it, and now I can launch this from PowerShell, and you basically only get one response. You're either going to get a fail to get that the runbook was launched successfully. So you could use that from any external system. Then if I can trigger a PowerShell script, I'm going to be in a good place to trigger from external, service desk platforms, etc., as I work my way over into a full System Center solution. So that's that one covered off. I think we're about 7 minutes over. Any other thoughts or questions? I see a few folks out here. A few new faces. Okay, folks, so if no other questions, you know where to find me out in the community at this point. Come chat with me on the TechNet forums at SystemCenterCentral.com or over at PZERGER on Twitter. Appreciate everybody joining. Thanks for your time, and best of luck.